Namaste, 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 everybody. We have the most extraordinary gentleman sitting here before us in this time frame. The time frame itself is completely immaterial because actually this gentleman is a cosmic interpreter of great wisdom who happens to be living in Hawaii and particularly on the island of Maui. So let me introduce you to him. I'm absolutely thrilled. Keone. I want to be able to move into the vibrational field of these very remarkable sounds. Keone, is this
Keone.
Keone? So this gentleman, Keone, is a descendant of the Mu people. We're going to explore what that means in a moment. These were the inhabitants of now this is interesting, the Papahānaumokuakea.
Papahānaumokuakea.
I love it. I did practice it, but of course I didn't have a reference before seeing you, which is a Northwestern Hawaiian Island before the migration of the Polynesians. And his profound lineage substantiates that he is from one of the oldest original families of Maui. This mystical ancestry spans over thousands of generations, and Keone now accesses the prehistoric sacred knowledge of Mu and ancient Hawaii, initially awakened within him by his remarkable maternal grandmother, who was a well-known Makaula mystic.
Makaula.
Makaula. Today, he is one of a handful of indigenous people who teaches and heals with Fern Medicine. How exciting is that? Including emotional intelligence and ancient primal meditations that include movement practices which completely invoke and evoke DNA activation. Well done, and meeting you is just such a pleasure. So,
Oh,
how was it when you opened your eyes as a very young being and you became aware of this extraordinary ancestry?
wow. Thank you so much, Stewart, for inviting me into this space and for introducing me to this audience. Yeah, my upbringing was unique in that I kind of had a reverse effect in how I engage with the world. I was brought into this world and was immediately hanai or adopted in a traditional way by my grandmother so that I could archive our mo'olelo or our family history. And this was a traditional ceremony that many children would experience in ancient Hawaii. It's not very common today. But so I like to say it like this, Stuart. The first 5 years of my life, which is the time span that I spent with my grandmother, Kawiki Onalani, it was just one long ceremony. And so I was really birthed into and raised into ceremony. At 5 years old, as it is the tradition of hanai, you're gifted back to your birth parents. My birth parents lived a very Western lifestyle. And so I kind of had this reverse where I'm like, wait a minute, ceremony doesn't really apply to like the Western standards, right? When I went to kindergarten and a public school, I'm like, wow, people think I'm weird. People think I'm like very peculiar and unique, and I feel ashamed. And so I learned really quickly how to adapt and imitate the Western world. And so I rejected the ceremony to which my grandmother had blessed me with, had activated within me. And I want to say it like that, activate, because we're all birthed into ceremony, all of us, but we all undergo certain conditioning that either invalidates that ceremony or distracts us. And so I had this reverse effect where I was gifted and became aware of the ceremony of life, including access to the Akasha. But at 5 years old, I saw the world that said, you can't do that. That's very strange. That's very weird. And so I adapted to the Western world. My whole childhood and much of my adult life was me performing, imitating what I thought the world wanted or expected from me so that I could belong. It wasn't until I experienced certain traumas or initiations that I really began to reorient into, wow, what is truly that to which brings me to the happiest, the most content space in my life. And my memories always took me back to Kawiki Onalani and my grandmother. And I said, well, that must be it. That must be who I truly am. And so for the last 10 years or so, that's really what I've been doing, is I've just been reorienting myself back to how I was from 0 to 5 years old.
That's a beautiful story. I'd love you to tell us more, particularly to the Western beings that are watching, although my audience is all over the world. I'd love you to tell us what your experience of deep ceremony is in its essence and why it's significant.
The best way I can share that today is deep ceremony is when all things are not just accessible, but also friendly. And I felt like that's a disruption that I had experienced with this Western mindset, is that we live in a world of competition, or everything is threatening. And with the world of ceremony, everything is accessible, everything is generous, everything is friendly, and it wants us to engage in a way that is of an integrity, engage in a way that is of an embodiment. But the world and the universe and consciousness approaches me in ceremony and says, Keoni, what's your contribution?
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. What a gift. Wow. And we have parallels. I was introduced to etheric ceremony as a child, completely wide awake and seeing spirit. And the parents that I was born to were royal servants. So I was born into the ritual and the tradition and the heritage and the ceremony of that level of protocol. I mean, we were initially living in grace and favor accommodation in a building that was almost 1,000 years old. So I was aware of spirit, and the spirit, supported and guardianed by angels, one angel here, my guardian, and also Archangel Michael. Spirit actually showed me what the embodiment of the universe was all about, that would action a healing process. It was almost as though I was being psychically inoculated, that when I awoke to schooling, they recognized that I would have issues with schooling, which I did, profound learning difficulties and not being able to read, not understanding math, which you've already met through my numerical dyslexia, the time displacement when we was initially meeting. Numbers do things, which is extraordinary, because over the years I've developed as an autodidact, I've developed my consciousness and work with number sequences, the way that number orders the chaos. But of course, this was all celestial and supernatural ceremonial keeping. It wasn't until my early adolescence that I entered into the recognition of how powerful ritual was for me from a sacred point of view. I love the way you speak about how well, you didn't actually say this, but you were hinting at the fact that the magic of the inclusivity of universal intelligence is sucked out of us often by the Western competition and so forth. And
Yes.
so is your grandmother has passed into spirit?
Yes, she has.
And so she was very proud of you.
I feel my grandmother.
What awakened your reconnection? You spoke of 10 years ago, there was a reconnection. What awakened that reconnection?
Yeah, I was in such rejection of the ceremony that it led me to become a drug addict. And as a drug addict, I became homeless, I became a criminal, and I was eventually incarcerated. And it was within that incarceration that I feel like I was at the lowest of lows. And that was the point where I said, well, I just want to check out. I just want to check out. But something prevented me from committing to that. Something said, well, pivot first, just pivot. My question to you, right? My question to you is, do you feel like you made a contribution? It's like, ooh, no, no. And then, of course, the next question is, well, what is your contribution? And that's where I really went internal. Okay. And then even, you know, began to even scan my heart, scan my spinal cord. And the vision that came up that just kept repeating itself was my grandmother's hands cupped before me like this. And I knew that was a symbol that represented and represents that perhaps my contribution is the knowledge and the wisdom that my grandmother transferred to me.
Mm,
Stewart, the moment that I accepted that was where my perspective of this world and my engagement in this world changed forever. And that gave me that fuel to once again make my reapproach and my
mm,
reintroduction to the world, which is what I feel I'm
mm.
doing still to this day.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. It's a beautiful level of clarity, the presence in which you speak, of seeing and really reading the language, because you speak of a great rite of passage that, although we see it as being really negative or derogatory, it was your way back into sacred space, wasn't it? It's just it was harming your body. And evidently, moving into the trial of being incarcerated took you into the inner space.
Yeah.
Really extraordinary. Many questions come to me. It feels as though your heart is speaking to my heart, your soul is speaking to my soul. I'd love you to talk about the the way that you then moved into the expression of Mother Gaia through Fern Medicine.
Oh, yes. And Stuart, I want to just touch on what I just shared about what is required for some of us to come into our kiakahi or our purpose.
Mm,
And my grandmother even shared this with me when I was young, and perhaps the audience can really relate to this. We have two options when it comes to coming into recognition of our kiakahi, of our purpose. One is called trauma, right? That's a legitimate initiation, and that's the initiation that I experience is trauma,
yeah,
but it doesn't always have to be trauma.
yeah,
The other path that my grandmother shared with me is grace. We can also choose grace. Grace means that I come into recognition that I want to be in my purpose, that I select it and I consent to it and I
mm,
believe it and then I function as such. And so, just a
mm,
reminder to the audience, because Stuart, I have this conversation often about my initiation, and it seems to be the common thread right now is that it's almost always trauma, right? Be like, oh, yes, I had a similar experience, trauma, a traumatic event, trauma. So I just want to reorient the audience and say, we can also choose grace. But just like you're saying,
beautiful.
like Stuart, right? That moment that I was like, okay, that yes, my grandmother's hands offering of the ike, which also means that I have something to offer as well. I can transfer that ike from 1017 generations to who we call the founder of this contemporary lineage, Mahat. And a lot of the data and the information, the knowledge and the wisdom that I share was really gestated from Mahat all the way through this line. And so I'm like, if I'm the contemporary body, because you can see me, you can hear me, so I'm the contemporary ambassador of this lineage. Sure, I'll be the one
Mm,
at this time and space to proliferate it. So I go back through this lineage and I'm collecting all the archives. And there's so much, and they're so generous. And one aspect is Fern medicine, Pua Ehu Ehu. And Fern medicine, we find this in the doctrines that go back to 18,000 BC or 20,000 years. This is pre-Paleolithic era. And so we're really discussing one of the oldest plant medicines known to man. And Fern medicine, Pua Ehu Ehu, is all about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence has kind of become a trendy word. And so allow me to express and explain what emotional intelligence is according to my akasha and my lineage. It's
Please
all
do.
about, yes, thank you, brother. It's all about voltage. Voltage. You and I, as human beings, we're having an electrical experience. This is all electrical. And as human beings, the source, the impetus of this electrical experience is our emotions. Our emotions is not only what incites and expresses the electricity of the human being, it's also what stores it. Stores it. And this is really fun, Stuart. So in the Matrix series, right, this very popular series that came out, The Matrix, I was watching this in, I believe, 1999, so some time ago. And when I
Yeah.
saw that, I'm like, oh, they have access to the Mu doctrines. Because one thing that they showcased is that the machines, the way that the machines harness their energy and their power, because it seemed that the sun was blocked out, but the way that they harnessed their power was they provoked certain emotional responses from humans. And that's what gave them power, energy. And so that was so indicative and so revealing about the power to which you and I were walking around with the power that can match the power of our sun. And that's within our emotions.
Hmm. I love listening to you. You know, you are so embodied that every part of you is muscularly involved in the passion of your conviction. It's just so extraordinary. So, you know, it's you have actually all of the qualities of a great, you know, I've spent a lot of my life in the entertainment industry as an actor, training actors, as a voice coach. And so you have, you know, when you come alive, you pulsate on so many different levels that you are actually the conviction of a performer. You know, you radiate, but you draw, you're magnetic, so you draw energy to you, which is just electrical magnetic, you know, just fascinating. And I really, because of these convictions that you express in your own unique way, I really want to amplify some of the convictions that you've just expressed for our listeners, that are awakening, and many of us are being awakened at this time. I just want to return to that core theme. And we're being awakened through desperation. I refer to it as being desperation. And you said there's a prevalence of this theme occurring in our lives because the same story is being told by us as it has been for our ancestors. And it's purely and simply with great honoring to the awakening, the initiation into spirit. It's purely and simply as a result of the neuroses of separation. And then alternatively, there is the inspirational awakening, where suddenly, like Saul on the road to Damascus, suddenly we are touched by light. And that actually, okay, so his eyes were so dazzled that he developed scales. That for Saul was not painful. That was simply part of the quest as he moved through. But of course, the first thing that we do, because our bodies have this level of sensitivity, living within separation, that we see it as being horrendous. And actually, it's all part of the honoring of what the awakening is actually all about, right?
Oh, beautiful. Yes.
Spot on. Okay, cool. I just wanted to amplify that notion of inspirational awakening and waking through desperation, and that we don't need to choose the desperation unless our karma, unless the Akashic light lords and ladies are calling us, or the record keepers are calling us to that level. But let's get over the drama. And the
Yeah.
key of what you're saying, which excites me so much, because I feel that this is universal wisdom speaking through, but is not the temperate zone of today's Western civilization, that feeling is the language of the soul. And we hear this when you speak, that you feel through the whole of your membrane, through the whole of your physical membrane. So you literally become alive and you pulse and you breathe the wisdoms that are pouring through you. And that's why I say, without even being in your full presence, in your physical presence, with your hands on me, that I know that you're an extraordinary healer, because you live that wisdom. And I'm pointing this out simply to glory in you, because I think you are someone to be gloried in. Because I know also your ego is really well balanced, and you're not suddenly going to go off with that. But also for us to become more discriminating, to become more discerning about the way that we choose healership, when we feel vulnerable, when we feel that something is disharmonic within us and we reach out, that we need to find someone who is embodied, and not just someone who has a lot of letters after their name, or has the gift of the linguistic. You and I meet it all the time, where people come to us and they've said, I've got this happening within my body and I don't know how to resolve it. And it's been diagnosed as blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. So let's detach, feel stillness, and observe. This is merely an intellectual diagnosis from someone who we're lifting onto a pedestal. And maybe what we need to do is to firstly find out, what is your spirit? What is the spirit world saying to you about this diagnosis? It doesn't have to be accurate. So how can we actually are you with me? We can rethink and refeel, so that we can find the wisdom of our bodies that we know are completely self-creating and self-organizing, teaching us how to come back to heal. And so we open up this electrical, not examination, but this electrical investigation into the wonder of fern life and plant medicine. And you're alive. Do you have a particular fern or a particular tree that draws you, that is one of your spirit guides?
Oh, absolutely. And everything you just said, yay, lovely. Publish that. So, Stewart, let me share with you how the ferns came into this custodianship of human emotions. And we believe that this occurred during the time of the shift into what is known as the Kali Yuga, which can be a spiritual dark age in a way. And we can even feel dark age, let's make that friendly. We can feel dark age as a kind of moratorium. It's a dark age because there's a moratorium. And there was concern that during this dark age, the human emotion, that voltage, that power, the power of the sun, might slip into obscurity. Of course, if something falls into obscurity for too long, it's lost. And so the ferns on this planet Earth, Gaia, are the only known species to have achieved what is known as evolutionary stasis. Evolutionary stasis means that a species has met their evolutionary ceiling. They no longer need to evolve. They're completely evolved. The importance of something that is completely evolved means that they don't need to accumulate data. And just like you're sharing, right? You're saying like, okay, we get all these diagnoses and we have an analysis that comes at us and tells us this is what you're experiencing. Meanwhile, no one asked me what I'm experiencing. They're telling me what I'm experiencing. With the fern, they don't need to accumulate data, which means they're completely pure and pristine. Nothing can corrupt them. And so in the shift of the Kali Yuga, the ferns volunteered. They said, hey, we have achieved homeostasis, evolutionary stasis. We will custodian the emotions in the transit of this Kali Yuga so it does not become corrupted. And at the time of the shift out of the Kali Yuga, we will begin to proliferate them back into the awareness of the humans. The fact that you and I are having this conversation right now is also indicative, and all the calendars in the world, the ancient world, are also saying this, that we are shifting back into a light age out of the Kali Yuga. And so this is how the ferns have held custodianship of our emotions. Laden in the spores of the ferns are the codes of human emotions. In my culture, we have 103 native Hawaiian ferns that correlate to 103 human emotions. Now, Stewart, the most common question I get, like, oh, okay, if there are individual ferns that correlate to individual emotions, what's a fern of love? Yeah, I want to work with that one. The fern of love. My response to her is so anticlimactic because it's like, there is no fern of love. Because love is the culmination of all emotions. Love is so colossal that a world of form cannot hold it. It will collapse the animate world. We call that ascension, transfiguration. Once you and I come into absolute fluency of the emotional experience, we enter into this realm known as love, and the animate world, this dimension, it will collapse and we ascend.
And that's what I really mean about the feeling is the language of the soul. By the way, thank you for what you've shared. I mean, there are sparkling wisdoms there alone. And I want to go deeper into the 103 ferns, and why 103. You know, what's the magic there? This is why I feel that there's actually a huge confusion in us about what is emotion and what is feeling, and that feeling electromagnetically arises out of source energy, whereas emotion is energy in motion, and it's engaged in much of the density of Kali Yuga and the way that our karma is now reaching such a fever pitch, as we see in the horrors that are taking place on our planet. On one level, on a 3D level, we also know that that's where the greatest light is. So it won't surprise you that I was working in Gaza this weekend with UN and Red Cross workers, and being called to that is not something that I said, please bring me. I was called. And so, it was a great honor to go and to witness what that cultural energy field is actually all about. And if the Dark One stalks there, that there's a great deal of suffering and cruelty. However, the great light that came through when I was able to draw the people into ritual, to draw them into ceremony. And because of their fatigue, their battle fatigue, their PTSD, the fact that most of them are terminally constipated, that we were able to go into, they yielded. They could see some sort of magic emanating from me, so they could trust and believe in the gentleness of what I was saying, because I spoke deeply from my heart, and they were very moved. They loaned themselves to practices that were unusual for them, and we were able to ritually create altars for those that they'd dragged out of the rubble, who were often dismembered, beheaded and so forth. But our bodies can be extraordinarily vulnerable, as we know they leak, and so this can be very shocking. No sentimentality, no sentimentality. Let's deal. Right, we're soul plumbers. We just need to roll up our sleeves and get our hands up that pipe. So we begin to realize that there are wonderful vibrational discernments that are leaking through at this time from universal force, from universal intelligence, from the Akasha, so that we can begin to see ways of orientating ourselves in fresh pastures, which is really, what this platform that we're sharing is all about, of how we can recognize that we're in a portal of a brave new world. So what hierarchy of values can we carry through with us that will literally allow us to navigate what have seemingly appear to be unnavigable waters, that we're beginning to orientate ourselves anew. You and I know that this has actually been experienced on some other level in past civilizations in different ways, particularly in the purity of Mu and the purity of Atlantis. So much of that old wisdom is now being reawakened within us, and of course, as you were saying, within Fern. And as you speak of Fern, I'm fascinated by that aspect of homeostasis, that it hasn't been necessary to move from the evolutionary platform of fern as it is in its exquisiteness, like other aspects of the vegetable kingdom, which is quite extraordinary. So they are within suspended animation, but also quickened by life because they're living through chlorophyll, they're living
Mm.
through the soil, they're living through the waters that come to them from Mother Earth's tears, etc.
Yes. Yes. You know, they're also, it's a grand reorienter, I feel, for all of us about really
Yeah,
coming to recognition of what it means to be organic.
right,
Organic. And I feel
right.
like that's a big conversation right now. And we can see how the ferns function, and they hold so much data and knowledge and information in an
Mm,
organic form. For many
mm,
people, I feel they're
mm,
rejecting the organic because it feels so limiting. But then
mm,
we experience the wisdom, the quantum nature of the ferns. And it's
mm,
also inviting us to reorient ourselves back
mm,
into recognition of how we can also host just as
mm,
much. And then what the ferns share with us, right? Will you come into recognition of the totality of the energetics and the voltages to which we experience? And then we will relax into that essence of love, which will be our bridge into the further dimensions. But we must come into recognition of what life feels like. And that's what the emotions are reorienting us. Feel everything. And you know, the dialogue that you brought forth about what you experienced going to Gaza, and then everything that humanity is experiencing right now, that's part of our feeling experience. Instead of
mm,
rejecting that, can we come into a kind of fluency as we
mm,
accumulate, right? What it means to be an organic being on this planet, which was designed for
mm,
organic life. It's
mm,
very clear that the atmosphere, the topography, everything that this planet Gaia represents, it says this is a place for organic life. Congratulations, that's why you're here. And then if we reject the organic, we're rejecting the very nature and the very purpose of this planet.
Everybody, you notice how Keone flows. He's so part of flow, and then suddenly he gets to a point of rest, and everything goes still. It's like the trees stop moving, the wind stops moving, when you reach still. You're so in consort with the elements. Um, so please, can you, through this extraordinary wisdom that pours through you, can you teach us about, share with us your perception of 103 ferns, 103 feeling states, and
Yes.
why, other than the fact that we all know that we become educated, conditioned, and socialized into pure intellect. So, I mean, the great thing that I'm dealing with all the time is that people live in their heads. They're all talking like, hey, it's getting faster and faster and faster. I mean, it's happening really aggressively in the United. Okay, so I'll stop doing it and come back into body and come back into, one of the great things that I do is teach that we each have a note, we each have a tone, which is right at the very center of our physiology. And if we can sound this note, it's the song of our soul, but it's not found in the head. It's
Mm.
found in the body. It's found in the heart. So can you share with us what you feel the 103 feeling states are? I'm prompted into this. I know we have short time, but I'm prompted into this because I feel that we're losing a feeling literacy,
Mm.
thought
Well,
literacy, but we're losing a feeling literacy.
mm. It's interesting too, because when many people are speaking into what the Gen Alpha, right, the humans coming into the planet now, it's kind of splintered. There's half that say that they're the indigo children, but then there's the half that say that they're illiterate and feral. And so, just as you're sharing, how can we come back into center, into like this song, right? And Stuart, that's so aligned with within the esoteric and exoteric, the music of the spheres. And I was just talking
Mm,
about Kiyotaki and contribution. That is the most pristine contribution. is our own music. And I really feel that comes by way of the convergence of our emotional experience, of the electrical experience, that love that we finally relax into, that is the song. That is our song. That becomes our contribution. And these 103 ferns, my grandmother and the elders, and this is very common in all indigenous cultures, but they speak in riddles. And so they never really say, right? They're like, it can get frustrating, right? You want the answer now. But my grandmother and the elders would always speak in riddles. And with the question that I had about the 103 this is what I do know, this is what I remember, and this is what I'm confident in transferring right now, is that of the pantheon of the Fern medicine, of these emotional qualities, there are 51 that are energetically feminine, 51 that are energetically masculine, and one androgynous. And that androgynous one is that to which creates the bridge between those energetics. Now, the house of power of the feminine, and I am a gendered male, but I am 100% feminine and I'm 100% masculine. The feminine, that noun aspect, for me, feminine energy represents establishment, belonging. The symbol of the feminine is the upside down capital T, which represents autonomy. So it's really my feminine energy that affirms my autonomy. Autonomy means my right to exist. That's first. Before any activity, that's first. I have a right to exist. And then we can see the exterior conditions. Many people are not even affirming that for themselves. And so their activity has no authority. It's empty. Until we come back into that feminine, which says first, before all activity, I have a right to exist. It's the establishment. And so we have 51 emotional qualities that support us in affirming that we belong. I belong. And then with that masculine energy to me is very verb. It's activity. It's the engineering. It's the architecture. It can also be the infrastructure of our life. And so we have 51 that represent really the activity of how we engage with this phenomenal world. And then we have one that is androgynous. And interestingly enough, I have it right here. This is Palapa Fern. Palapa. And Stewart, the audience may be familiar with this fern because it does also grow globally. It's more commonly called lace fern. And Palapalai represents emotional coded, right? In the spores of this being is emotional discipline. And I would love to ask you, Stewart, right? When we translate now that discipline's an emotion, yeah, according to the ferns, discipline is an emotion, and it's a very important emotion. It's a bridge. What comes through you, my brother, when you feel into discipline as an emotion?
For me, it's profound devotion. So for me, discipline, disciple, it's about reverence. It's about dedication and devotion. So for me, it's actually for me to receive the love of the Mother, Father, God principle. It's to receive grace. That's what discipline means to me.
I love that, Stewart.
I know in my humanness, I'm very disciplined because I've learned that repetition is the mother of skill. And so by disciplining myself into literally creating a distortion in the space-time continuum by repeating, in other words, by turning up in the same place with a different breath, but with the same intention and with a different feeling, that I'm led to a disciplined path, which opens my heart to devotion. And that for me is transcendental, because what I see in devotion as my heart opens is that I see the spirit world. And I
exquisite.
remember being like you and your grandmother, I was introduced to this when I was 4 or 5 by my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was a farmer, an agrarian farmer, who always had his hands in the soil and was magic at growing things. You know, he could take a lemon pip and just put his finger in the earth, put the lemon pip in, spit, and then move soil over it. And in 6 months' time, there was a lemon tree. And
Yes.
he spoke to the Devic kingdom. So he knew that I was a chosen one, and that I was very different from lots of other children, and I had grave difficulty with that because I couldn't understand why the other children at school were running around hitting one another. It just seemed
Mm.
so ridiculous. So I detached myself from it. I didn't remove myself, I just detached myself. So he saw this, you know, of course he heard the stories from my mother and father about I was having difficulty. And so he would put me on his shoulders and carry me off into the fields at 5 o'clock in the morning when the dew was rising, and he would introduce me to anima. He introduced me to the animating principle of the universe. He introduced me to universal force. And he believed utterly in this. So it won't surprise you that, you know, when I was the age 11 and I was in hospital having a tonsillectomy, he came to me as a white light and I knew he was passing, and he went off and said, I will always be with you, as he moved into spirit. So he teaches me a lot in the way that you have also been evoked. What I don't have as an urban dweller is the consistent experience of being in the depth of fern wisdom as you are, or in the depth of plant wisdom as you are. And that's something that I know is now calling me, and that I need to move from urban life into rural life. I'm just looking into where's this going to be in the world.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
Great Mother is calling to me for my next. I've just turned 70, so my next revelation of,
Oh,
you know, living this chronology.
oh, glorious.
Um, but more of you now.
Oh, Stuart, thank you for sharing that. And I love the way that you launched your translation of discipline. You began with to receive. And even if we feel into
Yeah.
legacy, right, and replication, we are first to receive something because we're conduits. And so what Palapalai is sharing in the code of discipline is first receive the universe. Receive it. Many of us are shut because of suspicion, and especially if there's that trauma culture, that we shut ourselves and we become so overly suspicious that we let nothing in. But so we're not receiving the universe, which means we cannot replicate the energetics of the universe. Replication of those energetics, and this is even talking about the nature of being organic, is about replication, a kind of replication. And so we're not being true archivists, and then we're not proliferating that. And so with
Mm,
discipline, yes, and the way that you set that up too was so beautiful and exquisite, Stuart, because you began with to receive and then to replicate that from the reception of that. And we can even feel how, just in the way you shared that, it touches on both feminine and masculine,
mm,
autonomy, activity, right
mm,
there in discipline.
mm. And thank you. The clarities are just beautiful because they're crystalline. They're so clear. Being with you is like being next to an extraordinary pool of clear spring water, but also is gushing from somewhere like a waterfall. So the androgyne, the androgynous nature of this particular fern leads to immense magic, as we
Yes.
already see through what you've described. When someone comes to you who is in need of medicinal care in this way, how do you prepare the fern? Do they ingest it, or is
Mhm.
it always externalized?
You know, that's a good question because it really depends on what's most resonant for an individual and how they are willing to engage with energy.
Mm,
And so, it can begin with just a scan of how someone is willing to show up. And from that scan, this is almost always, it's
mm,
affirming safety, affirming safety, because we have to open up, not just to receive, but also so that we can begin to share. And that which we share is genuine and authentic, not something scripted, because that's how we feel we have to engage with the world. And that's why in the feminine, what we call the unihipili, the feminine is that to which really governs safety. And so we come back into a recognition and a dialogue of what it means to feel safe, to be safe from that, because that correlates with autonomy. From that, now we can begin to exchange and have those important conversations. And with my work with people, that's where certain emotions come up, either because certain emotions are coming up saying, resource me, you're fluent already. I'm here to serve you right now. And then there's other emotions that come up that say, I've been neglected. I've been neglected. And I'm going to ask that you apply care to me now.
Wow. And so Great Mother really is speaking, isn't she, of how we can learn to yield and surrender. Because when we yield and surrender, it is not a question of letting go. We are literally held. It's like you were saying about your grandmother's hands. We are held in this extraordinary mystical council, an archive of divine splendor, which is everything and nothing but love.
Yes, yes. And remember what Palapalai says in that first part, right, Stewart? It's like receive, which is also an invitation. Just allow yourself to be held.
Yeah.
Just allow it.
Yeah. Which is, as it were, the archetypal feminine way, isn't it? To be entered into, to submit. And the male is to thrust forth.
Yes.
You spoke of the ancient ones. I mean, when I say that, the ancient wisdom pouring through those who were in flesh with you, particularly your grandmother as a child. You were fondly saying she spoke in riddles.
Yes.
And I want to explore that, because I feel that there's something really immense about that statement. And that I laugh when you call riddles, because within a riddle, there's a sort of, what exactly does that mean? You know, there's this consternation about the enigma and the mystery. But actually, we're receiving information on a totally different level, aren't we?
Yes.
In the riddle.
Yes, and what
And
the
it's
riddle
not done.
the riddle is actually generous, because it's saying, translate me according to you. And that's why the elders would never say, this is it, and that is fact, and period. They would present it in a very poetic way and say, you translate that according to you. You know, it's like with my elders, they would never say yes or no to me as growing up, which could put me in very dangerous situations. They would never say yes or no. They would wait until I had experienced what I had selected to experience. And then they would approach me and they would say, boy, they would always call me boy, how did that make you feel? Based upon how it makes you feel, you may select how to proceed.
I'm really moved. Just think if this level of intelligence was prevalent through the entire world. And we know with great honoring and respect to many of the good teachers around the world, particularly within systems like Montessori and Waldorf and the Steiner educational model, that there is space for this. But, you know, this is why I wanted to return to this, because it seems to me, the way that I perceive it, is that in speaking through riddle, we're moving into what we used to live through, which was the metaphoric consciousness of the humanoid. And what's happened is that we become bound by the cerebral consciousness. And many of us are just living in our heads rather than living within the feeling capacity of our bodies. And that if we can move back into the metaphoric, we can get a real, which is the feminine, I see it, and the cerebral being the male, we can provide ourselves with a healing bridge, a healing balance between using the compass of thought, but knowing that actually the governing principle, the real curatorial aspect of what we are here to be in our purpose. What are we contributing? And many people, as you and I know, are called to us today saying, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what my, oh, that's easy. Let's,
Yeah,
because everybody is fixated on the idea that I need
yeah,
to be what? I don't know. I need to be a scientist. I need to be a hairdresser. I need to be an airplane pilot. Whereas actually you and I know that that's not what that's the end result is not actually what it's all about. It's about the experience of moving into the optimization of our creativity, experiencing love and joy. That's what our purpose is all about. How do we give and how do we receive? Which is, have you been to Egypt?
I've never been to Egypt.
Okay, so you have to come to Egypt. I've been a pilgrim there for 50 years and I've run retreats there for the last 20. Because when we see in the wall engravings or the paintings, that there is always this instrument of giving to receive. There's always an offering, whether it's the ankh or sacred water or oils or jewels or prayers or whatever the sounds were. Many of them have their mouths open. So we know when our mouths are open, we're sounding. There's always a giving, and then the gods give
Yes.
back. So there's this
Yeah.
amazing flowing energy.
Mm.
What was the last thing that your grandmother said to you before she
Oh.
passed?
Mm. Well, this is going to be really interesting because in the last, I would say, 10 years of my grandmother's life, she went into full dementia. And so when
Wow.
we speak into riddles, right, and my relationship with her, especially in those last 10 years, it was all metaphorical. And
Yeah.
she would jump timelines. She would jump
Mm.
languages. She would jump identities.
Mm.
And so it was really like this almost chess game that I would have with my grandmother and
Mm.
navigating all of this. But on a really deep level, I knew and I was visually witnessing someone engage in their quantum field while also maintaining a physical form.
Mm.
And, many people, in modern days would call that schizophrenics. And I just want to share, kahunas today are very difficult to locate because the kahunas that existed in ancient Hawaii in today's world, they would be considered schizophrenics. And so we live in a world that is not accommodating, understanding of
Mm.
that kind of knowledge.
Mm.
And so it was interesting that the last 10 years of my grandmother's life, she allowed me to witness her in this quantum experience while maintaining a physical form. And
Mm.
it was actually incredibly, there's really no word for the gift of what that is and what I realize and acknowledge that to be for me right now.
Mm. Mm. I've only heard one other person say this, what you're describing,
Yeah.
and that's me.
Mm.
In other
Mm.
words, when we see the pandemic of what we're now calling senile dementia,
Mhm.
we're not asking why, because I can remember as a child that there were one or two people that we would encounter that my mother called Gaga, and they were older people who were not quite in their bodies.
Mm.
And therefore their behaviors were somewhat unusual. They
Yeah.
weren't, the norm, so to speak. And I was always fascinated by them because I would watch as a young child and I would see that actually they were completely out of their bodies, but their bodies were still there and they were talking to the spirit world.
Mhm.
But it only, a level of analysis did not occur on that level. But many, many years later, in my voice coaching career, a remarkable woman came to me who was the CEO of the European Alzheimer's Association, because we call dementia today Alzheimer's. Where's that come from? Why does it have to have that name? Anyway, that's another story. And she said, in all of your sound medicine and all of the healing that you do with sound, have you ever worked with Alzheimer's? And I said, no, I don't really feel that my level of vibration is accurate in that in that social container. She said, "Oh, come on, you're very magical. I'm sure you can do something." And I said, "I believe that really what we're looking into is melody and rhythm. And I'm not a musician. If I had a guitar or ukulele or something, that I know that could be used as transcendent." So she said, "Yes, but you chant." So I went to a center and sat in a room for an hour and a half with 25 people who were completely non-present and chanted. And they began chanting with me in their own form. And then, of course, the mists parted, and I was actually able to see that they were resolving ancestral karma, because I could see all of the spirit line. Well, not all of the spirit line, that's an exaggeration, but I could see many spirits, both in terms of their bloodline and their spirit line. And this was what, because they saw me seeing them, and so they gave me interpretation. And when I said this to the CEO of the she said, "Oh my God, you're a very unusual man." Hearing you and you being there with her and experiencing the distress on a human level of, oh, why I can't really talk to her in the way that I used to, but actually also being within the transcendental melody of pure spirit and feeling, I think is just exquisite. How fortunate.
Yes. And I feel like, if there was a lesson, that was my final lesson with
Yeah.
Kauki and Alani.
Yeah. And so if you were to take that teaching into a kernel, a real pith, how would you speak of it?
I would speak of it like this, because I've considered this, and I want to bring it to one of the misconceptions of feminine energy, which is that it's volatile. And yes, it has volatility, but mainly because volatility actually means potential, not violence. In today's standards, people want to translate volatility as violence. It just means potential. And so what I was experiencing was someone who had complete and utter access of all potential without the condemnation of consequence. And so they were able to, just as you were sharing that experience, people were able to go into almost immediate resolution and reconciliation because they were able to and had access to the volatility in the proper translation, which is potential.
And if you were to speak in terms of binary, what would you say the antithesis or the opposite, knowing the mirror of volatility, would be?
I would say, one of the disruptions of allowing ourselves into that realm of potential and volatility is subordination and submissive culture. And really that to which is informing it, and I'll just speak for myself, that to which has informed subordination and submissive culture for me is that I just need to belong. And if these are the criterias and these are the rules for me to be able to belong, of course, I'm going to follow that. And so the way that the world is playing out right now, I don't feel it's malicious. I feel like people want to belong. And they're making desperate attempts, just as you shared, desperate attempts to do that. But what we can do, and if we take the codes of Palapalai, open yourself up to the universe, and that fluidity will flow through us. That fluency of the generosity of the universe will flow through us, so much so that we begin to really feel into the true design of free will, which says that to which you're feeling, you may select. You may select.
It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. The time has whizzed by, and we're actually at a point of completion for this hour, this podcast. And I'm part of me is somewhat sad, but I know that you and I will go on conversing on a number of occasions. And Hawaii has been calling me, so I need to come. I must revisit. And you will be a main port of call that I'll be magnetized to.
Yes, brother.
But before we complete, lead us to the way that we can find your work. I know that Ryan will put up your website on the screen, but lead us to any of your material. Where do we find you?
Yes, thank you, Ryan. Yes, you can find me at pohala.net. That's the hub of my websites. I have other websites that are very specific to certain things that I'm sharing, such as a 3-month mentorship that I conduct virtually, and that I invite people so we can dive into those feminine, masculine, and androgynous aspects, and we incorporate the wisdom of the ferns in that. I also teach and guide people through a breathing and meditative and movement practice that comes from my lineage, 20,000-year-old practice called Ulu. And then I also share almost monthly virtual workshops and seminars that's accessible to everyone. And if you would like to partake in the replays of the workshops that I have offered, I offer them as evergreens on my website as well. I'm also work in the apothecary realms, where I do make medicinals by the way of oils, mists, hydrosols, tinctures of the medicine and the plants that I collaborate with. And so I invite everyone, please. And also my social media is very active, where daily I give something, I proliferate something called a fern cast, where I feel into, what emotional quality feels loud in the collective right now. And then I speak on behalf of that. And I invite people to engage with that emotional quality for the duration of the day, so that everyone can come into a kind of fluency of the actual sensation of that electrical experience we're having, known as the emotions.
Amazing, amazing. And where do we find that particular communication, that post? Which
Oh, yes, my brother. My Instagram is Pohala_Hawaiian_botanicals.
Are you a Facebooker?
I am not a Facebooker.
So you're very alive on Instagram.
Yes, that's where you'll find me with social media.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you will all agree with me that this has been a very remarkable hour. Whether you are persuaded by this information, or just simply you have many questions, go back and visit this extraordinary gentleman, because he is holding a series of keys that are really remarkable for all of us at this time. And it's been a great honor meeting him. So I thank you for joining us. I thank you for joining us. And I would love you to stay where you are for a moment while we close down. And ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, if you are interested, go to the angelsofAtlantis.com, and you will see there are all sorts of offerings and contributions to your life. And if you are interested in coming with me to, there we are, Ryan's putting it up on the screen, to the Resurrection Retreat in December the 9th to the 22nd, I am now drawing people. And so do come along, and you will have a magical experience, particularly about the arousal of Egypt, which of course formerly was known as Kem, and that was a colonization, so to speak, of Atlantis. So I'm one of the Shemsu Hor. I'm interested in teaching, meaning the followers of Horus, who originally moved on a diaspora from Atlantis. So if you're interested in any of that, however, back to this wonderful gentleman, it's been extraordinary that you have shared yourself with us. We're recording, would you believe it? Well, it's actually 7:30 in the morning, so it's not that early in Hawaii. But at the same time, you came along at 7:30 in the morning, so it's now 8:30. Bless you, and much love be with you. As to all of you, namaste, namaste, namaste. See you again. Thanks, Ryan.